friends, viewers, subscribers, members of the pit crew. My name is Rob. This here is BigRobsVan, and this week's video is a little bit of a jumbled mess. So let me give you a little bit of an explanation. In today's video, I'm going to show you how I put walls and insulation into my van. Now, there's a couple of things you need to know about this video. The first thing is that this video took probably 5 days to shoot, so there's a lot of incongruity in the clip. So if you see me changing baseball hats or t-shirts or the van moving slightly, that's what's going on. I filmed this over several days. The second thing that happened is when I copied all the video over from my GoPro, something happened. The file names got messed up and they got all out of order. So putting this video back together has been a labor of love. Imagine a jigsaw puzzle where all the pieces are the same color. So it has been going through clip by clip and trying to put everything in the right order. What happened, I believe, is that the battery got reset on the GoPro, so all the videos have the same date and time as well. So I wasn't able to sort them by date, by time, or by file name. So I literally had to put everything back together manually. So it was quite the effort. The third thing is because of that, I lost about a day's worth of footage. So there is a piece of this video that is missing. And what that piece is the step between when I put the styrofoam insulation up on the walls and then when I put the Reflectix behind there. So my walls currently have the sheet metal, Reflectix, styrofoam insulation like you would find in a house, and finally the wall paneling. So I'll explain when we get to that point, but there is a little piece of the step that's missing. I almost, because of that, wasn't going to edit this together. I wasn't going to post this video. However, everything, and I mean everything, that I did on this van was made possible by watching other people's videos on YouTube. I've mentioned before, I watched a video on someone else installing their Max fan. That's how I installed my Max fan. I watched other videos of how people built their beds, the sliding beds when I built my first bed. That's how I built my first bed. I watched a video on how to install rotating seats on the front of the van. That's how I installed my rotating seat. So everything that I've done so far, I have learned by watching YouTube videos, and I didn't think it was fair for me to watch videos and do something and not make my own video and share that back to the community as well. So this isn't the most perfect video I've ever put together, but I did want to show how I did my walls, and maybe you'll find something useful in here if you're putting walls and insulation on your van. So with that, we'll get started. There's going to be a lot of overdubbing and a lot of splicing clips together, but we'll get through it together because, gosh darn it, we're van lifers, and that's what we do. We power through even when the neighbor decides to start mowing right when I hit record. So let's get started. To put walls and insulation on the walls of your van, you're going to need a template, and I'm going to show you everything that I did wrong. So the first thing that I tried was to make a template out of cardboard. So I'm doing a couple of things wrong here, to be honest with you. And the first thing is I didn't really plan on insulating the entire wall. I was just going to insulate those indentations where the windows would normally go in the van, which turned out to be really complicated and a really hard idea. So anyway, I got this cardboard, and not that cardboard is a bad way to make a template, but this is like really thick shipping cardboard, which was really difficult to cut and draw lines on and everything else. So this idea simply did not work for me. I thought something that was thinner and easier to put on the walls for a template might work better, so I had this roll of wrapping paper from the Dollar Tree. So that was my second plan. This might have actually worked, except for this is the world's thinnest wrapping paper. Again, you may have heard me say Dollar Tree. So even as I was unrolling it, the wrapping paper was ripping. Every place where I tried to tape it to the wall, it ripped. When the wind blew, it ripped. So, I mean, this may have actually worked. I thought it was a good idea, but this wrapping paper was just so cheap and crappy that it didn't work in this instance. So let's go back to the drawing board for idea number 3. After yet another trip to the Dollar Tree, my third idea was to use yellow poster board. I thought poster board would be the perfect solution. It was thin enough that I could mold it a little bit, but not so thin that it would tear every time I tried to move it. By the way, this project should be called "How many times can you get in and out of your van before you throw in the towel?" I'm going to tell you, I probably climbed in and out of my van 200 times during this project. I put a little step ladder towards the rear of the van to make it easier to get in and out because I got in and out of my van so many times during this project. So the poster board actually kind of probably should have worked, but it was a little too thick for me to contour around this. And around this time, I kind of gave up on the idea of doing the contoured areas in the middle. I just thought maybe it would be easier to do the entire wall. Now, here's where you know you're stuck on a project, when you go right back to where you started from. Here I am dragging the cardboard back in once again to try it. I don't know why I thought it would work a second time, but you can see me trying to line it up. I mean, the poster board didn't work for me, the wrapping paper didn't work for me, and you'll see a lot of long shots of me staring at the cardboard wishing it to work, but it just wouldn't work. Now, here's a little secret that I feel like I need to tell you, is that I am very right-brained. I'm very creative. I like writing, I like music, I like cutting and pasting and making videos, but I am not left-brained, and my brain could not wrap itself around how to do this. If only I were married to someone who's very left-brained. Oh, I am. Her name is Susan, and so basically I had to admit defeat here and go ask my wife if she would give me a little bit of help in figuring out a way to do a template, and boy did she. While I was waiting on my wife to come out and join me in the van, I decided this would be a good time to start emptying out the rear of the van. So I pulled the bed out. If you've been watching my channel for a while, you may recognize this as my old slat bed. This is the bed that I already got rid of a few videos ago and threw away and replaced with a sturdier bed. But again, some of this footage is several weeks old. So anyway, that's what I'm doing here, is cleaning out the rear of the van, because with both of us in there, we're going to need room to work, and when my wife jumps in on a project, she does not let go until it's done.
He had to bring in the big guns.
What are you doing?
I'm drawing out the cutting guide so I can number the cuts and then measure the cuts.
For the record, this is the mess that I had left in the rear of the van. Yep, you can see wrapping paper, you can see cardboard, you can see poster board. It's time for me to get all this stuff out of the van and get out of my wife's way. So this is an exciting clip of me removing trash and stuff from the van. Not that exciting. There is my freezer / refrigerator. I reviewed that on an earlier episode of BigRobsVan, and let me tell you, that thing was amazing on our last road trip. I had it running off of a battery. It drew around 35 watts per hour of power, and I was getting over 100 in on solar. So my battery stayed at 100% all the time, and that refrigerator worked great.
Okay, what's your plan?
So this is like the heart of everything, right? So we've got to get this right. I'm gonna tape where these cuts need to be based on what I saw in that video. It's gonna be a straight across, and then an angle, and then this, right?
Yeah.
But we want to tape it first so that we know that the cuts are going to work.
For the record, I find measuring things a pretty boring way to do woodworking. I would much rather buy a bunch of wood and just chop it up and hope that it all fits. But not my wife. As you can see, she has measured each of these and labeled them so that we will end up with a cut list. It didn't take too long before she had all the places that we needed to put a furring strip marked on the van, and then she went through with a tape measure to get the lengths of each one of those pieces of wood. I don't know anything about the stock market, but at some point, wouldn't it make sense to just buy stock in Home Depot? We're here on a Friday morning. It's not as busy as normal, but it's always busy at the Home Depot. It didn't take us long to find what we were looking for, and the furrowing strips were really inexpensive, so I bought several extra just in case that I cut something wrong and we didn't have to make yet another trip to Home Depot. Here's a picture of our haul, and here's a picture of the sun. Back at the house, I started removing my hexagon shelves that I had velcroed to my cabinet, and the next thing I knew I was going to have to do was remove this cabinet. Now, this cabinet is a lesson in van life. Sometimes measurements that make sense on paper just are too big for the interior of a van. I built this thing to be 2 foot by 2 foot. I measured it out. I thought it would be perfect, but it was just too dang big for the van. It was also super heavy because I used plywood. I just made it too heavy. I love this thing, and I know it's not going back in the van. Now, before cutting all those furrowing strips, the first thing I wanted to do was move my workbench out to the driveway. I didn't want my entire workshop filled with sawdust yet again. So I built this workbench specifically designed with rollable and lockable casters. So when I'm going to do a woodworking project like this, I can wheel it right out to the driveway and do all my cutting out there. Now, on summer days like this, it's almost a coin flip. Do you want to do it inside where you're going to make a huge mess that you're going to have to clean up, or do you want to go out to the driveway where it's literally 100 degrees Fahrenheit? And so I ended up doing most of the furrow cutting outside, but man, was this a hot day. So after everybody had cooled down, we came up with a pretty efficient system. Susan read me the length of each piece on her cut list, and then I cut them to match. The ones that were going on the left side of the van, we stacked on the left side of the van, and the ones that were going on the right, we stacked on the right.
This is what? A, and it goes on the left. Next is 39. G.
After all the furring strips had been measured and cut, it was time to pre-drill holes in them, and it was so hot outside that I moved my workbench back into the shade to do that. My workbench splits into two pieces, so I open it just slightly so there would be a small crack so that I could drill holes through these pieces of wood and not drill it directly into my workbench. So this took another 30 minutes drilling holes in the end of every piece of furrow strip. Just as before, we did one side of the van at a time. So all the pieces that were going on the left, I carried back out and put on the left-hand side. Then we did all the pieces that would go on the right-hand side. It just seemed like it would make things easier to keep them separate. After all that drilling, it seemed like a good time to recharge my Ryobi batteries. I ordered some metal self-tapping screws for this job, and even though we drilled the holes, even though we measured the depth, even though we took every precaution, there is still a leap of faith when it comes to drilling holes directly into your van. And of course, Susan did not let me have all the fun.
Stuff like that. They killed it, right? I mean, it's...
Look good? Now for the real test. Let's see how many are sticking out the outside of the van. I think we're okay. Do you see any? I don't see any yet. So now it's on to insulation. About a month ago, I went to Lowe's and bought some sheets of insulation. I didn't really do a lot of research. I kind of looked online to see what other people were doing. I based my purchase on the thickness of the insulation, knowing how deep my furrowing strips were. And yeah, I've had this stuff sitting in my workshop for about a month waiting for this project, and now it's time to get started. Cutting each piece of insulation to fit was as time-consuming and annoying as you probably think it is. I had to measure each area. I tried to get them in squares where they would fit. I used a jigsaw to cut the insulation. I've seen people use those electric knives or razor blades, but a jigsaw went right through it and was super easy to do. I also used my air compressor to blow off all the little extra styrofoam stuff that was generated when I cut. I didn't want to drag all that extra styrofoam stuff back into the van. My goal was to cut each piece so that it wedged in perfectly and I wouldn't have to use any sort of adhesive to hold these pieces in place. Now, because the furrowing strips were sometimes different heights, that means I had to cut lots of different panels, and sometimes when there would be a slight gap, I would cut a tiny sliver of insulation to wedge between the two pieces so that everything would be held in, basically just wedged in between the wood. And so if that sounds like a lot of work, boy, are you right. This took forever to do, and you can see me fiddling with just the very beginning of this project. So again, what I'm doing here is back in the van, I have measured the next size of panel that I need. Then I come back into the workshop. I use a straight edge and a tape measure to plot out that square. I mark it out with a Sharpie, and then I cut it with the jigsaw. This involved, I can't stress this enough, how many times I went into and out of the van. This was like, you don't need a stair stepper to work them thighs on van installation day, because you're gonna get a workout. So I'm kind of letting this clip run just a little bit longer, and I'll speed it up, but just so you can see the work that went into cutting each individual tile of insulation. It really was a lot of work, and a lot of these YouTube videos you watch, people, they just say, hey, I put insulation on my van, and it's a 2-minute video, and I'm telling you, this is not a 2-minute process. This was a lot of work and a labor of love, but I know in the long run I'm going to be much happier in the van once I have insulation and it's a little bit more comfortable in cold and hot weather. One thing I'll add that made this a little bit easier is I drug out a second tape measure. So I left one tape measure in the van and one tape measure here on my workbench. When I started working on this, I kept losing the tape measure. It was always in the wrong spot. When I needed it in the workshop, it was in the van, and vice versa. So by having one in each location actually did make this quite a bit easier. And so that's basically how I did it, square by square. I would take a measurement, go back into the workshop, cut that piece, and put it back into the spot where it goes. Some of them were easier than others. When we were doing the furrowing strips, I tried to have big square or rectangular areas, and so those were easy to cut. Those were just, straight 90-degree cuts, and they seemed to squeeze right in. And so anyway, those were easy to do. However, some of the pieces you will see I had to cut little notches out, and those were more difficult to get right, and I'll show you a little bit of having to go back and forth and just trim these in just so they would fit. You can see sometimes I had to really press these to squeeze in, and that was the whole goal, was to make them so they were a tight fit so they would squeeze in and I wouldn't have to use any kind of tape or nails or adhesion to keep these in place. Now, unfortunately, not everything is a 90-degree cut, especially when you're trying to do the insulation around the wheel wells, and you can see this piece has kind of an angled cut. The good news is that no one is going to see the insulation. This is all going to be behind the paneling, so if there's a tiny little gap, there's something I could fill in, later, maybe with some spray foam insulation or something, or cover it up with some tape. So the cuts were pretty good, but not everything was 100% edge to edge.
So if I look a little smug in that last clip, like I just accomplished something, now you know why. After I finished cutting and sizing all of my insulation pieces, I pulled that out, and that's when I put the Reflectix up. And actually, there's another step that I don't show because I did all of this on the same day. I had some sound deadening panels, like the adhesive stuff. I used to do car stereo stuff a long time ago, and I've had sheets of that stuff lying around in my workshop for years, and so I've just hung on to it in case a rainy day it came up, and the rainy day happened to be the day I was doing that. So now you might be asking yourself, why didn't I do the Reflectix first instead of putting the furrow strips up? That is a great question. That is a very logical question that I have no good answer for. The reality is we got so carried away with the furrowing strips and buying it and then cutting it and putting it up that I really didn't think about it. And then as I had the styrofoam stuff in place, my wife said, weren't you gonna put that Reflectix stuff? And I went, yeah, I was gonna put that Reflectix stuff back in there. So I used some glue, a little bit of adhesive. I got it to fit basically in those same panels. So there is basically what you're looking at now is a layer of metal, the metal of the van, a layer of Reflectix, actually a layer of sound deadening panels, not too many of them, just the stuff that I had laying around. The Reflectix and the sound deadening panels, I want to say, are both in the same category of couldn't hurt. That's what it was. I know the Reflectix, especially when pressed up against something like that, is not the best heat barrier or the best insulator, but I had it. That was the plan, so that's what I did. So I've got metal, sound deadening, some sound deadening, Reflectix, styrofoam house insulation that I got from Lowe's, and then the wooden panels. So the wooden panels are what is going up next in the video on top of the styrofoam, but basically those are the layers, and that is the clips that I lost when transferring this stuff over from the GoPro. So enough of me yapping. Let's cut some wood and get some walls installed in this thing.
So with all the styrofoam and all the insulation in place, now I had to make a template
for the wooden panels. Now, originally I wanted to do one full panel from floor to ceiling. So it's about 4 foot. My panels are 4 by 8. So that was the original intent. I wanted to screw it in at the bottom, screw it in on that middle furring strip, and then kind of bend it and go to the top. But what I quickly discovered is that that was not going to work. And so I changed my mind. And what I did was I took all my 4 by 8 sheets of paneling and cut it long ways so they became 2 by 8 sheets of paneling. So that became the new plan. I'm going to attach the bottom half of each panel to this furring strip down to the floor, and then the other one from that furring strip up to the ceiling. So what I'm doing here is making a template for the bottom one for the shape out of cardboard to get this weird shape around the wheel well so I can trace it onto one of the panels. So here you can see me tracing that template onto one of the panels, and now I'm cutting the panel out. I was much more careful when cutting the panels than I was when working with the insulation. The insulation was relatively cheap compared to these panels. These panels weren't that expensive. They were like $20 each, and I think I needed 4 or maybe 5 for the entire interior of the van. So it wasn't, you know, it's not super expensive, but it was expensive enough that I didn't want to make a mistake when I was cutting them. Once I trimmed out around the wheel wells, you can see that the panel was a pretty simple installation. Once I tossed it up in there, you can see it sat right on top of the wheel well, so it was a perfect fit. And then it was just a matter of screwing it into those furrowing strips. By the way, when editing videos, this is one of those moments that is filled with movie magic. This clip alone is 28 minutes long, so you're just seeing a little fraction of what it took to install everything. Now, this is one of the parts of the project that would have been way easier with a second pair of hands. What I discovered was that everything on this project was a straight line, but unfortunately the straight lines did not line up. So when putting the top panel on, I had to decide, was I going for the straight line on the bottom of the van? Was I going for the straight line in the middle where that furrowing strip was? Or was I going with the straight line at the top of the furrowing strip? And what I finally realized was that if I had a little bit of that furrowing strip showing either in the middle or on the top, I could cover that with a little piece of trim. So that's really the only thing that saved my sanity during this part of the installation. This is one of those behind the scenes shots. I just want you to know that it took me 900 times to get this panel up and straight. I tried screwing it from the left hand side, I tried screwing it from the right hand side. Eventually I got it where I thought it was lined up, and I screwed it in place in the middle, and then I put the left hand side, I moved it, then I undid the screw in the middle and then redid the screw on the right. By the time I was done with this, my shins were completely devoid of any skin, and I had smashed my fingers multiple times. Plus I had to re-put in some of the styrofoam that I had knocked out with the panel. So this was a huge pain in the butt, and one of the many times in life I've suffered by not having enough friends and using favors when I should have saved them for a day like this. Now, as you can see in this shot, the driver's side wall of the van is a little bit longer than 8 foot, and these panels are 4 foot by 8 foot. So I had to cut some additional pieces to flesh out the front part of the van, and I had to cut some little angles to mark out like where the seat belt goes, and just some little funny angles there. And then I had to put those in. But again, this was actually a simple part of the job. You know, it was relatively easy to mount these pieces and finish out this part of the wall. Once all the wall panels were up, I made another trip to Home Depot and picked up these pre-painted trim strips. Now, they're a little bit thicker than a traditional trim strip, but I did that because I thought I might need to screw something into these at some point, maybe attach, anchor my bed to it or a shelf or something like that. So that's why I got these. So they're a little bit thicker than a normal trim strip, but they don't get in the way, and they add a little bit of structure, just holding everything together.
Cutting the trim strips was a breeze because they were all very simple 90-degree cuts. I installed them into the van with these with the same screws that I was using before, but one of the problems was those screws were black and this trim is a white, a very light gray, and so the screws really stood out. So I took a white paint pen and covered the ends of the screws with the paint pen, and while they don't completely disappear, they don't stand out as much as they did before. Now, here's one of those bone-headed moments. When I was getting in and out of the van, I measured the gap around the gas filler, and it was 11 inches by 14 inches. So when I went back and cut it out of the piece of trim, I accidentally used the wrong dimensions. Instead of being 14 inches wide and 11 inches high, I did 11 inches wide and 14 inches high, which first of all did not go all the way around the gas filler, so I had to cut more and left this big ugly gap. Now this thing will be hidden behind a shelf or the bed. You'll never see it, but it was really bothering me, and so using scrap pieces of wood, I filled in the space around this gap. It's not perfect, but it looks really good considering you'll never actually see it.
So that's how I did my walls. As you can see, I could not have done this without my wife's help again. She is the left brain one. She's so left brain that I just said this is left brain and this is my right brain. She is the left brain. She is the organizer. She is the lover of spreadsheets. She is the formatter of documents. I am the creative one. I'm the one who would rather just saw things. We have gone to the casino many times. She is the one, when she plays blackjack, who pulls out her strategy card, follows it to a T. I'm the guy who goes all in just to see what'll happen. So we have opposite personalities, and it has worked for the past 29 years. We got married right around the time we were also legally able to drink. So we've been married for a long time. It's worked out great, and she is definitely the organizer of the project. So without her, this would have never happened. As you saw me struggle at the beginning with the poster board, with the wrapping paper, with the cardboard, with whatever. Like, I just don't do that. When we get IKEA furniture or something like that, she's the one that puts it together. I'm the one that draws pictures on the cardboard and is generally annoying during the entire process. So, number one, this would not have been possible without her. Number two, this would not have been possible without my Patreon pit crew. So thank you to all my patrons who are following me on Patreon, and to everyone who has bought me a coffee through buymeacoffee.com. So you can find those links down there, but it's patreon.com/BigRobsVan and buymeacoffee.com/BigRobsVan. Also, if you're not familiar, there is a website, BigRobsVan.com. You can go there about once a week. I post articles, kind of blog style articles about things I'm doing, things I'm working on. I always put an article that corresponds with the video I've put up. So if you like reading maybe a little bit more details or things like that, you can always go over to BigRobsVan.com. And while I'm plugging stuff, go over to Instagram and find me at BigRobsVan. I'm always posting little pictures, silly shots, links to things, whatever. So wherever you do your social media, whatever, if you like reading longer stuff, you like seeing pictures on Instagram, you like watching the videos, but the videos are my, I don't want to say my I can't even say bread and butter, so why would I say it is my bread and butter? But I mean, I'm not monetized or anything like that, so it's not like it's that, but they're the most fun to do. They are obviously the most laborious thing to put together, but going out on my camps and doing the videos and the videos of builds and things like this are a lot of fun. So if you want to get notified anytime I post a new video, click subscribe down there. I'm really trying to meet those YouTube requirements to get monetized, which means I need more watch hours. And I think I'm actually there on subscribers. I'm not sure, but it's the watch hours. But you know what? If none of that happens, who cares? We had fun. We built some stuff. We went driving. We slept in a van. We did all kinds of kooky adventures. So, I mean, that's really what it's all about, right? So, yeah, like, subscribe, yada, 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 do all that stuff. But if you don't do any of that, watch the videos, have fun. Or more importantly, go have fun yourself. And then while you're out having fun, watch videos of me having fun. Literally, all I do at the end of these videos is ramble. I gotta come up with a more succinct way to end these videos. I'm just gonna go like this. BigRobsVan, out. I'm gonna add a sound effect. BigRobsVan. Stupid. I don't know how to end these things.